The lights came up on the Colbert studio, the crowd cheering as always. The music faded, the laughter faded, and Stephen Colbert leaned forward with his signature grin. Ladies and gentlemen, he's a legend, an icon, and the reason you never skip a serious movie, Denzel Washington. Applause exploded. Denzel stepped onto the stage calmly. His face didn't show the usual Hollywood smile. He didn't wave too hard. He didn't clap along with the crowd. Instead, he walked over, shook Colbert's hand once, and sat down slowly, his posture sharp, eyes steady. Colbert began the segment with a playful jab. "You're always so serious, Denzel. Even when you're just ordering coffee, I imagine it's intense." The audience laughed, but Denzel didn't. He looked at Colbert, straight and unblinking. "That's the thing, Stephen. We joke too much about things that aren't funny anymore." There was a small pause. Colbert tried to chuckle, maybe to move past the strange tension. "Well, I guess that's one way to start the night." Denzel leaned in slightly. "Why do we act like entertainment is separate from reality? Why pretend it doesn't shape how people think, vote, live?" Colbert adjusted in his chair. "We try to bring joy, balance. Not everything has to be heavy." "But it is heavy," Denzel said. "You have millions watching, and we laugh while the world burns." The audience was quiet now. No one knew if it was a bit. Some people looked around nervously. One person in the back coughed. Colbert tapped his note cards like a lifeline. "I mean, we're just trying to give people a break." "A break from what?" Denzel interrupted. "Truth, responsibility. When do we stop distracting and start speaking clearly?" Colbert cleared his throat. "Let's talk about your new movie." Denzel shook his head slowly. "Not the question people should be asking. Not anymore." The host leaned back, trying to regain control. But Denzel had already taken it. "You know the stories we tell. You know which ones get buried, which ones get funded. You know the game." Colbert gave a nervous smile, trying to play along. "So you're saying I'm part of the problem?" "I'm saying we all are," Denzel said calmly. "When we sit here pretending it's just comedy, just fun, we're lying to ourselves." A few camera crew members glanced at each other. The audience was frozen. The laughter sign flashed, but no one responded. Colbert tried to change the tone again. "You've always been passionate, and that's what makes you a great actor." "I'm not acting now," Denzel said. Silence. Colbert paused for a moment. "Denzel, this wasn't on the card." "No, Stephen," Denzel said, eyes still locked on him. "You're just not used to people steering it." Line hit like a brick. A gasp came from the left side of the audience. Someone whispered, "What is happening?" The cameras kept rolling. The control room didn't know if they should cut to commercial. Colbert looked completely off balance, now hands clasped, leaning forward, eyes searching for a way out. Denzel sat still, calm, like a man who had prepared for this moment long before he walked into the building. And suddenly, everyone watching realized this wasn't a show anymore. This was something else. The control room was in chaos. Producers waved behind the cameras. The stage manager paced furiously, motioning to Colbert to go to break. But Colbert was frozen, his fingers tightening around his blue cue cards, trying to find his rhythm again. "All right," he said with a forced laugh. "So let's pivot here, maybe talk about the movie. It's called No Man's Echo, right?" Denzel finally broke eye contact, gave a slow nod, and looked out toward the audience. "It's about a journalist," he said, "one who tells the truth, till people stop paying attention." Few audience members clapped hesitantly, unsure if they were supposed to. Colbert tried to jump on that. "That sounds powerful. So it's about integrity, something you've always brought to your roles." Denzel turned back to him calmly. "It was supposed to premiere next month. Studio shelved it last week. Said it was too real." Colbert blinked. "That wasn't in the prep notes. Too real," he repeated, stalling. Denzel nodded once. "They said the story made viewers feel uncomfortable. You know what that means? It wasn't dangerous, just didn't lie enough. A hush swept through the studio. Someone in the second row pulled out a phone. Another followed. Crew didn't stop them. They were watching too. Colbert tried to keep it light. Well, I guess that's Hollywood for you. No, Denzel said, his voice lower now. That's control. That's censorship dressed up in a suit and tie. You know what I'm talking about? Stephen shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. I think a lot of people would say we do our best with the platform we have. And who gives you that platform? Denzel asked. Who funds this show? Who decides? Which topics get 5 minutes and which get buried? Colbert had no answer. His hand was now flat on the desk, fingers tapping nervously. The studio lights suddenly felt hotter, harsher. I've played cops, kings, villains, heroes, Denzel said, his voice steady. But I've never played a man pretending to laugh while the world chokes. The crowd was silent. Colbert exhaled, clearly trying to find an off-ramp. Woo-woo, we do need to go to commercial, but Denzel stood up. Smooth, deliberate. No, you don't, he said, unclipping his microphone. If you want to go to commercial, someone in the control booth whispered, cut the feed. Another voice responded, no, wait, let it run. Denzel placed the mic on the table. The world doesn't need another funny interview tonight, he said, looking out into the audience. It needs honesty. Just one room, one camera. One moment where someone says, this is not normal. The audience, still holding their breath, began to stir. Some nodded slowly. Others just stared, unsure what they were witnessing. One woman in the front row whispered to the person next to her, this isn't about the movie. He's trying to say something bigger. Colbert sat back in his chair, arms crossed now, silent. Denzel looked back at him one last time. We're drowning in jokes, Stephen, and nobody's throwing a rope. With that, he turned and walked off stage. No wave, no smile, just footsteps echoing across the floor. The cameras kept rolling for a moment, catching Colbert's stunned face, his, crew's confusion, and a crowd too shocked to clap. Then the screen faded to black. Backstage, Denzel kept walking. Down the hallway, past the dressing rooms, straight out the side door where a black car waited. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't look back. Within minutes, clips from the taping hit social media. Fans, critics, celebrities all watching in disbelief. One clip of Denzel saying you're just not used to people steering, it was reposted over 2 million times in 3 hours. By morning, the internet was split in half. Some called it a meltdown. Others, a masterclass in courage. The network released a single-line statement by noon. Last night's segment with Mr. Washington took an unexpected turn. We respect his voice. Colbert didn't show up to the next taping. People weren't laughing anymore. By sunrise, the late-night landscape was on fire. News networks across the spectrum scrambled to interpret the moment. CNN ran a headline calling it an actor's stand against media complicity. Fox countered with Hollywood elite hijacks. Talk show with anti-media rant. Social media didn't wait for the pundits' raw audience footage flooded every platform. Unfiltered, shaky clips of Denzel removing his mic, walking off set, leaving Colbert staring at an empty chair. The silence after his exit said more than any applause could. People began digging. Clips of Denzel from earlier interviews, moments. When he had hinted at frustration where he spoke about accountability, about the cost of remaining silent in the face of systemic decay surfaced, it became clear this wasn't spontaneous. This was a man who had waited years for the right moment to say it. And when the lights were brightest, he didn't blink. In the studio, things weren't much calmer. Colbert didn't return to set after the break. The rest of the episode was filled with pre-recorded sketches. The crew exchanged hushed words in the hallway. A producer who had been with the show for over a decade was overheard saying, "That wasn't an interview. That was an intervention." Later that afternoon, CBS held an emergency meeting. Executives debated whether to release the full footage or bury it entirely. Lawyers weighed in. Sponsors were already calling. One executive demanded Colbert publicly apologize to regain control of the narrative. Another pushed back. We can't apologize for letting someone speak the truth. But Colbert stayed silent. Meanwhile, Denzel had disappeared. His publicist issued no comment. No follow-up interview. No tweets. Nothing. It was as if he had dropped the match and vanished into smoke. But the fire was spreading. Online forums lit up with speculation. Was this performance art? A publicity stunt for a suppressed film? Or was it something deeper? Indictment of the entire machine. A few journalists caught wind of No Man's Echo, the movie Denzel had mentioned on air. It had reportedly been set for a spring release before the studio Paramount. Ironically, under the same corporate umbrella as CBS quietly shelved it. Insiders said it was too political. One early script reviewer leaked a synopsis. A whistleblower journalist who uncovers a government-funded media campaign to manufacture cultural distraction. The film, according to the leak, had scenes uncomfortably similar to real-world events. Now it was all making sense. A young journalist from an independent media collective, only 23, with barely 5,000 subscribers on YouTube, managed to track Denzel down. Not with a camera, with a letter. A handwritten note left at a community center in New Orleans where Denzel had once sponsored an after-school program. 3 days later, the channel uploaded a 24-minute video, grainy footage of Denzel sitting in a folding chair in a local gymnasium, surrounded by a small circle of students. No lights, no makeup, no stage. The industry doesn't fear violence, he said. It fears clarity. And clarity doesn't come with a script. He spoke about the limits of representation, about how real change didn't happen when actors won awards for playing oppressed people. It happened when those same actors risked losing everything to protect the voices they portrayed. They want you to feel seen, he said, not heard, not empowered, just seen long enough to calm you down. The video went viral overnight. In the following days, dozens of creatives, writers, producers, even a few directors began sharing their own stories of scripts watered down, projects pulled for being too real, segments deleted because they disrupted the flow of entertainment. Colbert, meanwhile, stayed quiet. When he finally returned to his show a week later, the tone was different. There was no monologue, no laughter. Colbert, seated at the desk, looking directly into the camera. I've spent years making people laugh about serious things, he began. But I wasn't ready for someone to stop laughing and speak directly to the wound. He didn't name Denzel. He didn't try to explain. Instead, he said something few expected. I've always believed comedy was a scalpel. But maybe it's time to hand the mic to someone holding a mirror. Some applauded the humility. Others called it damage control. But behind the scenes, pressure was mounting. CBS's parent company was nervous. Ratings were unpredictable. Sponsors were restless. And then quietly, without press, a private screening of No Man's Echo was held in a small theater in Venice, California. The audience was hand-picked: activists, journalists, whistleblowers, and community leaders. At the end, there was no applause, only stillness. One attendee, a former editor for a major news outlet, tweeted afterward, "Now I understand why they didn't want you to see it. It's not a movie, it's a mirror, okay? And some people can't stand to look." The ground was shifting. The tremor had only just begun. By the fourth day, the walls inside CBS headquarters were trembling, not physically, but structurally. Reputation, ad revenue, network hierarchy, all felt one breaking story away from collapse. In a sterile glass conference room overlooking Manhattan, executives from multiple departments were in emergency session. Ratings from the last week's Colbert episodes had plummeted nearly 19%, a cliff fall no one had seen coming. Social media wasn't talking about his monologues anymore, they were dissecting his silence. The longer he said nothing, the louder Denzel's words echoed. On the wall screen, paused, was a frame from the now infamous leaked audience video Denzel Washington, mid-sentence. Mic in hand, fire in his eyes. The caption below read, "Truth doesn't have a schedule." One of the younger network strategists finally broke the silence. "This isn't about a guest out of control," she said. "This is about trust. The audience doesn't trust us anymore." "But it's fiction," snapped a senior VP. "It was an actor going off script. It wasn't a manifesto." "He wasn't playing a role," the younger woman shot back. "That's the problem." Producers from The Late Show sat stone-faced. They had been ordered to prepare a behind-the-scenes special, something sanitized, lighthearted, maybe even humorous, to put the moment in perspective. But none of them were confident Colbert would agree to it. In fact, he hadn't returned their calls since his on-air statement. Across the city in a brownstone office rented by an independent distributor. The rights to No Man's Echo had just been sold to an international platform known for edgy political content. The studio had dumped the rights at a loss, quietly, hoping it would disappear into the sea of niche streaming options. But it didn't disappear. Within hours of the news, activist communities across Europe and Latin America began demanding screenings. Posters with Denzel's silhouette, head bowed and mic in hand, began appearing in Paris, Bogota, and Cape Town. The caption, "Visibility is not enough." Meanwhile, Colbert stayed inside, alone. He hadn't returned to the studio. The team was instructed to continue reruns until further notice. According to one close associate, he was rewatching the Denzel segment on loop, examining each moment's his own reactions, his attempts to redirect the way the room had slowly turned against him. It wasn't the loss of control that haunted him, it was the possibility that Denzel had been right. For years, Colbert had built a reputation on satire that veered toward truth. But when truth stared him in the face, raw, unscripted, unfiltered, he had flinched. He had tried to control the narrative. And in doing so, he had exposed himself as part of the very system Denzel had condemned. That reckoning was not just his to bear. Other shows were starting to feel it too. Trevor Noah, on a podcast, cautiously addressed the moment. What Denzel did, that wasn't a performance. That was testimony. The room wasn't ready for it. The next day, Joy Behar clumsily joked about it on The View. The audience didn't laugh. In the quiet spaces between headlines, whispers turned to deeper concerns. Some former network staffers began releasing anonymous statements describing how discussions around real issues were often blocked by tone policing or demands to keep content advertiser-friendly. One whistleblower from the PR department of CBS leaked internal emails showing that segments involving grassroots political activists, climate whistleblowers, and racial justice leaders had been pulled or postponed in the last year under vague notes like "too intense," "wrong audience," "not good optics." Suddenly, Denzel's words weren't just provocative. They were provable. Then came the school. A journalist from the Atlantic tracked Denzel to the New Orleans High school where he had first reappeared post-walkout. She described a man at peace, but not silent. He had been speaking to students about not just media, but memory, about how stories are chosen, shaped, and often erased. "He said something that stuck with me," she wrote. "They don't silence you by yelling louder. They silence you by flooding you with noise until the truth feels like background." Her article was shared over 1 million times in 24 hours. That same night, an emergency clip aired across multiple streaming services. No Man's Echo would have a limited digital release in 72 hours. The campaign was called "The Mic Was Never Off." Inside CBS, panic became paralysis. No matter what spin they tried to craft, Denzel had walked out, not been cut off. They couldn't shift the narrative. The people didn't want spin. They wanted to know, what else have you buried? Colbert's executive producer sat alone at his desk watching. A raw cut of a never-aired interview they had filmed months ago. When the trailer for No Man's Echo dropped online, it wasn't polished. It didn't have the studio's branding. The lighting in some shots was uneven. The score was simple, just a slow piano under a voiceover, but it shook everything. Stories shape the future, Denzel said in the opening. So who decides which ones are worth telling? Within hours, #No Man's Echo was trending across platforms, not for its cinematography, not even for Denzel's role, but for the message. A message that suddenly seemed like a direct continuation of the moment that had rocked Colbert's studio to its core. Colbert, who had remained publicly silent, found himself at the center of something no PR team could contain. Old interviews were being resurfaced. Critics on the left accused him of becoming the very gatekeeper he used to mock. Others insisted he had just been caught off guard. But the clip was clear. He had tried to move on. Denzel hadn't let him. At the same time, independent media outlets began publishing deep-dive reports into the culture of late-night TV. One article from a former segment producer detailed how guests with controversial opinions were often reshaped in post-production. It wasn't censorship, she wrote. It was worse, it was polishing. We didn't cut the truth. We blurred it until no one could see it. Denzel didn't give any interviews during this firestorm, but the people who had sat in that studio audience hood watched the mic drop. The stare down, the walkout, they became unexpected witnesses. Videos from audience members surfaced across TikTok and YouTube, all showing the same moment. Denzel, standing without a word, shaking no hand, walking out like a man leaving a battlefield. For many, it felt like the first honest thing they'd seen on television in years. Meanwhile, other Hollywood figures began to speak. Not all publicly. Quietly, and then louder. A group of Black filmmakers released a letter of solidarity with Denzel. Truth isn't always elegant, it read. Sometimes it walks out in silence because the noise is too loud. That week, Joy Reid invited a group of activists, media, critics and young journalists onto her MSNBC show for a panel titled, "Who's Holding the Mic?" The conversation was intense, real, and it pulled ratings the network hadn't seen in months. Back at CBS, Colbert's team met behind closed doors. What if he doesn't come back? One junior producer asked. His executive producer gave a thin smile. Then we keep the lights on for whoever walks in next. But everyone in the room knew something had changed. Colbert had finally agreed to speak, but not on his own show. Instead, he chose a long-form sit-down with Christiane Amanpour. No comedy, no editing tricks. Just him across from one of the most respected journalists in the world. The interview aired on a Sunday night. It opened with silence. Colbert sat still, looking older, worn. Then Amanpour asked him, "Why didn't you stop and listen?" He didn't dodge it. "I was scared," he said. "Scared that if I gave up control for a second, I'd lose the room. That I'd become the guest on my own show." He paused. "And in doing that, I lost something else, credibility." He admitted he hadn't watched the segment again after it aired. "But I've read every word Denzel said," he added. "And what scares me more than the moment is how many times I've heard something like it and laughed it off." The interview went viral, not because Colbert defended himself, but because he didn't. A new kind of tension emerged. Not just about what had happened between him and Denzel, but about what lay beneath it, the systemic manipulation of public discourse. Through media formats that pretend to question power while protecting it. That same night, a former entertainment lawyer revealed that No Man's Echo had been shelved originally after focus group feedback indicated it was too confronting for general audiences. The phrase caught fire online. Too confronting. It became a rallying cry. Mural artists in LA painted Denzel's face on the side of buildings. Activist students on college campuses organized mic drop watch parties. Even a high school drama class in Chicago performed an adapted version of the Colbert-Washington exchange, word for word as a final project. Meanwhile, no man's Echo climbed to the top of streaming charts in multiple countries. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was something else. A teacher in Baltimore tweeted, "I showed No Man's Echo in my classroom. My students didn't talk during the whole screening. When it ended, one of them just said, 'Why don't people say this stuff on TV?' And yet the industry kept spinning." A new late-night host was announced on a rival network. Young, social media savvy, safe. Their first guest, a pop star with a new fragrance line. But in the comments section, people weren't celebrating. They were asking what happened to Denzel's mic. It had become more than a clip, more than a scandal. It was a wound in the glossy surface of show business. A reminder that real conversation is dangerous, not because it offends, but because it reveals. And now that the curtain had been pulled back, the question wasn't who would speak next. It was who would dare to listen. 3 weeks after the night, everything changed. Denzel Washington was invited to speak at Columbia University's School of Journalism. The event wasn't streamed live. No media outlets were allowed in, but those who were their students, professors, independent documentarians knew what they were witnessing wasn't just a lecture. It was an indictment. He walked to the podium without introduction. The room was packed, electric, uncertain. And then, for nearly an hour, Denzel spoke not as a celebrity, but as a citizen disgusted by the culture he had helped build. "I stood on that stage," he said, referring to Colbert's show, "and realized that for years I was a well-lit distraction. I've won awards while people were losing everything. I've played heroes while real ones were being buried without headlines, silence. Media is not just broken, it's obedient. And the more polished the lie, the harder the truth has to fight to be heard." A hush fell over the room, not because they disagreed, but because deep down, everyone in that room knew he was right. Many were part of the machine he was now dismantling word by word. Outside, the backlash was boiling. A Hollywood studio head caught on a hot mic was recorded saying Denzel's on a martyr tour. It's burning bridges faster than he can build them. Another producer tweeted, then deleted, "Actors should act, not lecture." But the tide had shifted. And it was no longer just Denzel. A young CNN field journalist published an op-ed titled "The Green Room Illusion," where she described the silencing mechanisms behind live programming. "We are trained to ask the right questions, but only if they come with clean answers." Her piece went viral. So did her resignation letter. Soon after, an old clip surfaced from a 2009 roundtable discussion hosted by PBS. In it, a much younger Denzel sat beside other major stars and said quietly, "I worry that when the time comes, I won't say what needs to be said." The internet exploded with the resurfaced footage. The time came. One user posted, and he said it. Meanwhile, inside CBS headquarters, Colbert was fighting a very different kind of battle. Ratings had dropped. Not drastically, but noticeably. Audience surveys showed viewers wanted more honesty, less script, more guests like Denzel. But executives wanted stability, safe guests, viral clips that didn't threaten advertisers. Colbert's room had fractured. Some felt betrayed, others felt inspired. The once-close team now sat divided by what had happened donned, what hadn't. Then, a whistleblower. An anonymous leak, verified by multiple sources, revealed that parts of Denzel's segment had been deliberately flagged for deletion before. The live cut. A producer had warned higher-ups that the show might go off script, and executives prepared backup segments in case of content instability. It was the phrase "content instability" that enraged the public most. As if truth itself were a technical glitch. Denzel, upon hearing of the leak, made no statement. But his team quietly released the full, unedited version of the Colbert interview start to finish onto a decentralized video platform with no commercial ads, no sponsors. Just the raw moment. It clocked over 50 million views in 3 days. In that version, audiences saw not just the walkout, but the build-up, the hesitation, Colbert's attempts to regain control, Denzel's insistence, the way the camera cut to commercial mid-sentence, the way the audience tried to clap, not out of support but discomfort, and most damningly, the look in Colbert's eyes when he realized he'd lost the room. At the White House, Press Secretary Karen Dalton was asked about the Denzel moment during a daily briefing. She paused before answering, then said, "Free speech isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary." The room was stunned. In Hollywood, 2 major directors approached Denzel privately. One offered him a script that had been blacklisted for a decade about a whistleblower inside a fictional media empire. The other simply said, "I just want to hear more." But Denzel declined both. Instead, he announced he would be producing a documentary not about himself, but about suppressed stories from inside American media. Titled Echoes Unheard, the film would feature testimonies from former journalists, editors, publicists, and actors who had seen the truth distorted in real time. He said, "I'm not telling my story by making space for the ones who couldn't." Suddenly, networks that had ignored him began to feel the pressure. Other celebrities began to hint at similar experiences. Some spoke openly, others didn't dare. It was a Thursday night when everything finally broke. CBS released a sudden press statement. "The Late Show with Stephen Colbert will undergo a creative reformatting. Mr. Colbert will step away temporarily to pursue other projects." Temporarily, but everyone knew what that meant. Within an hour, news outlets across the country spun their own headlines. Some framed it as a natural evolution. Others called it a fall from grace. But most understood this was fallout, not just from one interview, but from what that interview had unearthed. That same night, Denzel Washington appeared not on a talk show, but on a live panel hosted by the People's Channel, a small but fast-growing independent network known for investigative, exposes, and unfiltered discourse. The panel included whistleblowers, blacklisted journalists, former Hollywood insiders, and one ex-CIA media liaison who had chosen that moment to come forward. The broadcast was raw, candid. There were no cue cards, no commercial breaks. Denzel didn't sit in the center. He wasn't even the moderator. He sat to the side listening, only speaking when necessary. When he did, it wasn't performance, it was clarity. "We're not just fighting lies," he said. "We're fighting the performance of truth, the illusion of balance, the production of silence. A silence followed heavy and true." The broadcast was viewed by over 80 million people within 48 hours. Clips flooded social media. Hashtags like #MikeForTruth and #EchoBreakers trended worldwide. It wasn't just a media moment anymore. It had become a movement. The next morning, something unexpected happened. An anonymous former producer from The Late Show published a personal blog post just 3 pages long titled, "We Knew, But We Looked Away." It described the months leading up to the Denzel incident, rising discomfort in the writer's room, political pressure from network executives, a growing fear of platforming guests who might steer the conversation too far. The post included internal memos referencing the Washington booking as high risk, and detailed last-minute efforts to pre-record the segment, which Denzel refused. The blog was verified, sourced, and eventually aired on multiple platforms. That same day, a short video leaked from inside CBS headquarters security camera footage. No sound. It showed Colbert walking down a dim hallway, shoulders hunched, his show notes clutched tightly in one hand. He stops, stares at the studio entrance, then slowly turns and walks the other way. The image went viral instantly. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't celebration. It was an ending. Colbert never issued another statement. Its official social channels went dark, no farewell episode aired, no final monologue. Just silence. In contrast, Denzel's Echoes Unheard premiered at a community art center in Oakland, not at Cannes or Sundance. The room was filled not with celebrities, but with students, teachers, community activists, and grieving families whose stories had never made it to air. The documentary didn't feature Denzel's voice until the final minute. Given a microphone, he said, but I realized the power was never in who holds it. The power is in what you choose to say, what you refuse to be silent about. Critics called the film devastating, essential, unforgiving. Audiences wept. Not because it was sentimental, but because it was unflinching. In Washington, D.C., a bipartisan group of senators opened a formal inquiry into editorial influence across major news networks. It wasn't just about Colbert. It was about patterns. It's about years of compromised narratives and silenced dissent. It's about what we were told to believe and who told us. Meanwhile, young creators across the country launched their own platform storytelling initiatives. Community newsrooms, street-level reporting hubs. They cited Denzel's moment not as inspiration, but as ignition. At universities, students began demanding new media ethics curriculum, not just about fact-checking, but about power-checking, influence audits, representation protocols. Something had shifted. Even Hollywood couldn't ignore it anymore. Films began to change, not overnight, but subtly. Scripts were rejected for being too safe. Directors once branded difficult were brought back into the room. The red carpet felt smaller. The stories felt louder. Denzel was asked during a rare radio interview months later if he would ever return to mainstream television. He paused. "I don't need the stage," he said. "I just need the room, to be honest." That same week, an independent online poll asked Americans which moment had most changed their view of the media in the past decade. The top response wasn't a war, or a trial, or a political campaign. It was Denzel Washington confronting Stephen Colbert on live television. But in the end, it wasn't about two men. It was about a rupture. A live moment that cracked the polished surface of an industry and revealed what was boiling underneath. It was about the mic no longer being a property, a weapon of truth. And when that screen went black on that night, it wasn't an end. It was a beginning.